Now, has it gotten any easier to settle on which pattern I would like to do for my first color work? No. Hi, hello, my name's Allie. I'm an independent graphic designer and knitter coming to you from just outside Toronto, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, and what it is costing me. And today we're going to be talking winter knitting plans because 'tis the season. Also, to be clear, this is not like a YouTube set. This is just the room that my Christmas tree goes in, so now you get to enjoy it with me. You're welcome. And then also, as part of those winter knitting plans, we're going to get into a bit of a whip update later because it's related. And at the end, I'm going to get into my usual off the needle segment where I do have a sort of reading and writing update since it's been a little bit and we're overdue. So before we get into the plans, as for what I am drinking and drinking out of today, this is a brand new mug. I went to the One of a Kind show with my friend Brooke this week and picked up this mug from Studio 648 with these little cute hearts on it. It's also a giant mug, so big fan, love a giant mug. And in it, I'm drinking the last of my Bluefields Earl Grey from Keats & Co. I actually have more on the way, but it's like trapped in the abyss of the Canada Post strike, which if you're not from Canada, our National Postal Service is currently on strike, and like good for them, they should be, I support them. But the utter havoc that it's wreaking, like particularly at this time of year with all the online holiday shopping people are doing, it's just like madness. And I just have to wonder, like, there's a non-zero chance that like this tea never makes it to me, right? That it just gets lost like forever in the black hole of like the giant stockpile that they're going to be accumulating. I don't know. So Godspeed to that shipment. We will see if it ever finds its way here. Anyway, if you're not in Canada and you want to try out Keats & Co, I do have a 25% off coupon. And then as for what I'm wearing today I'm actually not wearing a hand knit, but I am still making something that I made technically because if you missed my last video, I decided to put my graphic designer self to work for myself, for my channel, to create a cute little like maker badge design. So this is now available through my Etsy shop on baseball raglans like this one, on t-shirts and on stickers, and it's actually embroidered, not like digitally printed, so it's really nice. So I'll leave a link in the description where you can find these if you're interested. And there's also another design as well available in all the same formats. And if you've bought one of these in the last week since I released my gift guide video that I included it in, thank you so much, because it really made my week to see a few orders come in. And like, it was a very stressful week for me for other reasons. Copper had to go to the vet for some tests that came out good. It's fine, but there were some scary possibilities. So it was just really nice to have something positive going on in last week and to see that people actually liked this design that I also liked, but you never really know sometimes how other people are gonna respond. So that was really awesome, thank you. All right, now I think that to really get into our winter knitting plans properly, we kind of need to rewind and look back at my fall knitting plans and see where are we relative to that. So in my fall knitting plans, I talked about having some concrete plans and then some maybes and then some like realistically no, but they're cute, look at them. And so let's just focus on the concrete section, because did I get to anything beyond that? Absolutely not. No. And we'll get into why. So one item on the concrete list was Mum's scarf, which I was going to be knitting out of this extremely eccentric yarn that she picked out when we were together on a trip to Venice earlier this year. So this one, check, complete. This one knit up so fast. It was on a giant gauge. It was like a long weekend. Perfect, done. The Christmas stockings I wanted to knit, done, beautiful, on my wall. See them, aren't they nice? Now, these took longer than I expected them to, and these are a part of why we are where we are in our fall knitting plans, which you will see the entirety of in a moment, which is not as far along as I wanted to be. I thought that these I could probably knit up in like a couple weeks because they were a bulky weight. And I just really underestimated how much the cabling of them was gonna slow me down, particularly because this is a pretty in-depth cabling situation. There were a lot of different cables with different numbers of stitches happening on many different rows. It's not like an infrequent cabling situation. These just took longer than I thought they were going to. And there's a dog barking outside, which means the copper is concerned, so we're gonna distract him for a minute. Good, Bucky. Sit. And wave. That's a nice Bucky, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know, that's stressful. I know. Oh, did you just get lipstick on you? Yeah, you totally did. And so the fact that these did take longer than I expected them to is the reason why A, the Colette pullover that was also in my concrete plans has not been started, and B, the Minu cardigan that I am knitting for my sister allegedly for Christmas is still a work in progress, and much more so of one than I would love for it to be less than a month out from Christmas. So that's the whip update we're gonna get into in a little bit. But I mean, at this point, it is now a winter knitting plan. Winter is functionally here, even if the calendar doesn't agree. Yes? Do you think you're starving? I just fed you. Is this really the time that you have to get the one last kibble out of your ball? Okay. we're just gonna carry on. He may or may not be doing that, hard to say. So yeah, that's kind of where we are with the fall knitting plans as they existed in the fall knitting plans video. And then right after I put out my fall knitting plans video, my next video was when I sort of had the idea of doing the Fix It Fall knit along that I've been talking about. And so that also pushed a few things, and then I spent some time extending my dad's socks to make them longer, redoing the neckband on my Laura Del Garden Tarja sweater. And there are other Fix It Fall things that I would like to be doing. Things like darn my reading socks that I have been missing like every single day since it finally got cold out, but I can't wear them because there's a giant hole in the bottom that's only gonna get more giant if I keep wearing them. So I need to fix them before I wear them. Have I done that yet? No. So that's sort of our state of the needles going into actual winter knitting plans. So what do those entail? So first up, the Colette pullover. I am not giving up on this project. This was not a, like, if I have time this fall, I'd like to make this. It was more of a, I really would like to make this, and maybe it's going to take me a bit longer to get to than I had been planning, but I will be making it. So the Colette pullover is a pattern by Sari Nordland. It accommodates up to between a 58 to a 62 inch bust, depending on how much of the recommended positive ease that you want. It's a drop shoulder construction knit on 3.5mm needles, and this pattern costs €6.90 in euros. Now, this is one where I actually already have the yarn for, so I will hold that up to show you. So this is the Wandering Flock in their cotton lino base. This is 35% organic cotton, 30% mulberry silk, 20% linen, 15% baby alpaca. There's a lot going on in there, but it is such a nice, soft feeling, mostly plant-based fiber, but because of that little bit of alpaca, it really has that softness. I think it's going to be really nice to wear, and I think it's going to work really well with this pattern because I think that the eyelets included in this design will make this, in combination with the yarn, a really nice sort of like lightweight sweater. Like, I think this will be one that could kind of double bounce back and forth between being like a beach sweater, you know, like when the breeze picks up on a mostly warm day, but the sun's starting to go down. It's July, but it gets chilly eventually. And also being a cooler weather sweater with just like, you know, like a long sleeve tee layered underneath it. So I'm really excited about the idea of having something like that in my wardrobe because currently all my beautiful knit sweaters that I'm so proud of, sometimes I can't wear them even when I would like to just because it's not quite cold enough. So I'm looking forward to having something that's more middle of the road in terms of the sort of temperatures that it is applicable to. And I'm also just obsessed with this citrine green color. I think it's going to be so beautiful, and I'm so excited to work on this. I just haven't been able to yet because of this Minu cardigan that I'm now working on. So I think this is next up, but you will see in a moment what is sort of vying for the next up slot against it. And for the record, I ordered this yarn directly from the Wandering Flock online, and it cost me, including shipping, $145 Canadian, which converts out to about 106 US. And that's for 3 skeins, and according to the yardage in the pattern, I should need about 2.5. So this is a nice amount of buffer, which makes me happy because I often have problems with yarn quantities, so should, knock on wood, be all good. All right, so that one's not a super exciting plan because if you saw my fall knitting plans, this is not new to you. So here is where we get into the new, the interesting. So if you saw my last video, you will know that in October, I visited Vancouver. And what I did not mention is that while I was in Vancouver, I went to Bad Anna's yarn store. That's Bad Anna with multiple A's because Anna's in fact a sheep. And while I was there, I bought some yarn. So I would say the crux of these winter knitting plans is trying to decide what I'm doing with this yarn because it is the most beautiful, the most perfect, and it requires the most perfect project, which makes it really hard to pick. So this is from Shelterwood Fiber Co. This is a DK weight 3-ply 100% Romney wool in this beautiful like warm gray brown color. I mean, actually the extent to which is it a gray or is it a brown? The tag also cannot decide. And the thing that really sold me on this in store is that this yarn is milled in Vernon, BC from locally produced fiber. So just the idea of getting this yarn that was very local to the place where I was getting it from really appealed to me. And it's also just such a beautiful color. I love the warmth of it. It also has some sort of lighter bits. There's sort of a light, almost halo effect around it in the lighter colors. It's just really lovely. And I thought that it would make for a really nice main color in a stranded colorwork sweater because I was also talking in my fall knitting plans about the fact that I've never done stranded colorwork and that I would like to, but I was just kind of having trouble settling on a pattern to do. And some possibilities had made it into my sort of like maybe probably not section of that video. So when I found this yarn, I was like, okay, this is what I would like to use for the base of such a sweater. So if I get this, I'm not much closer, then I just need to figure out my contrast colors, my pattern, and we're good to go. Now, has it gotten any easier to settle on which pattern I would like to do for my first color work? No. I picked up 4 skeins of this, which based on most of the colorwork patterns I found should give me sufficient yardage to knit one of the smaller sizes. These are 220 meters each, so that's 880 meters in total. And these are $27.95 a skein. So with tax and everything, this came out to $117.67 Canadian, which is equivalent to about $84 US. So I now have the most perfect yarn. And the question is just, what am I gonna do with it? And as you're about to see, I don't really know. There's a lot of options. Please help me. So one of my first thoughts on this is ever since Veronica Lindberg or Kutova Kika released her, not her very new pattern book that's like just come out, but her one that came out maybe a couple years ago, there's a sweater in there called the Dirty Caramel that I love. I think it's so beautiful. And I was thinking maybe I would knit that one, but I was looking, and despite the fact that I think a lot of her newer and self-published patterns do have a pretty broad size range, the sizes for this sweater that was originally designed for this book are not as extensive. I decided I would rather find a pattern that is more size inclusive. So what I found, and I feel like this one has a fairly similar vibe, is the Serendipity by Knitting for Breakfast. So this is a 4-color stranded colorwork top-down circular yoke. It's knit on 4mm needles, and its sizing accommodates up to between a 62 and a 66-inch bust, just depending on how much of the recommended positive ease that you want. And this pattern is $5.50 in euros. So I really love this design. I think that of all the ones that I'm going to mention here today, this is the one where I think that on its face, I'm the most compelled by this one, but I'm having the hardest time deciding what to do with the color scheme, in part because it is 4 colors. It's just a lot of variables to play around with. And I'm finding that despite how much I love this warm gray brown, and I feel like it looks much nicer on me than a cool gray does, I feel like matching colors with the cool gray is kind of easier. In that, I should specify, I really love like bright, fun, saturated colors. And I feel like most of those, when I mock them up against this, are just not it. Like they just kind of give like a weird effect. Like this to me feels like it's kind of begging to be paired with like an earth tone or something. And for the most part, those are just not really my thing. So I've been really struggling to figure out a combination of colors that I think that I would like for this. And I'm sort of oscillating between extremes because I'm going between like, I want to use like electric green and like maybe my contrast color should be black and it's like super low contrast. I don't know. So I've been messing around a ton in mock-up land. I'll pop up my video all about how I mock up my knitting projects to try to figure out what I want to do before I do it. So I've been doing a ton of that, including messing around with the chart to make versions of it that are 3 colors instead of 4 colors, that are 2 colors instead of 4 colors, just to see like, is there a different version of the color distribution that I feel I can make work more easily with the kind of colors I want to do. And I found a lot of possibilities and just nothing that I'm entirely convinced like, aha, this is it, this is what I want to do. And I'm just feeling lost. And then for a minute I was also thinking that this might be the right opportunity to work with a Okay, rewind. So La Bien-Aimée recently released a colorway called Inko as part of their anime collection that I just find to be the most delightful looking skein I've ever seen. But you know, I saw it and I had the thought of like, why do I feel like this might be one of those things where I love the skein, but I don't love what it knits up as? And there aren't a ton of examples that I can find of what it looks like knit up as, but La Bien-Aimée did post this picture that's made using that yarn. And I was like, yeah, I feel like I was right. I don't super love how this comes together in a piece where like that is all of what the color is, which is unfortunate because I think it's just such a gorgeous skein. But then when I was, you know, desperately thinking through every possible color that I could pair this with, I was like, wait a minute. I wonder what that would look like in a stranded colorwork situation where you're just sort of getting peaks of it and not this big overall effect where you see weird pooling or zigzagging or whatever and just, you know, combinations of the colors grouping in ways that I don't love. Maybe that would give a very different effect in a stranded colorwork situation. Maybe this is my excuse to order some Inko. Wouldn't it be beautiful? Wouldn't it be fun? And just when I was sort of getting very attached to that idea, I discovered that it's really hard to find in a way that will not cost me more money in shipping, basically, than the yarn itself. And like, La Bien-Aimée yarn is not cheap to begin with, right? Like it is like small batch dyed yarn, right? It's nice, it's pricey. So the idea of then spending like, I think it was going to cost me like 20 euros in shipping. Was it 30? It was just an amount that I found to be like horrific. But like, it was just very clear that like, they are not really intending to be shipping to people in Canada, right? It's like, I'm sure that their shipping pricing makes sense for people who are like within the region they expect to be shipping to. it's not me. And there are lots of places that do ship to me for reasonable prices. Unfortunately though, the anime collection does not seem to have been like widely distributed. So I've not been able to find the Inco on the Merino DK base, which is the one that I need, anywhere that will ship to me for under what feels like $1 million. I did find there's a shop in Brooklyn, I believe the Brooklyn General Store, that has, I think, the fingering weight. And I was like, okay, well maybe I could hold that double. But between the fact that then like the shipping was better, but it still wasn't like phenomenal, and it's fingering weight, which means I'd be holding it double, which also I imagine would affect how the colors kind of look as it's pulling through the stranded color work, because you're going to be getting like 2 little blobs of color in each stitch, which I imagine would just make the colors feel a bit more muddled. And I'm already concerned about the muddling. Like, it's the muddling that I don't really love in when it's just knit like stockinette. So I just fear that the fingering weight would not be maximizing my odds of really loving how this colorway turns out. So all this to say, if you know of a way that I can get the Merino DK base in the colorway Inco from La Bien-Aimée relatively affordably, please do let me know. Anyway, so there's still a lot of thinking to be done on this one. There's still more mocking up to do. I don't know. I really love the look of this. And part of me is like, should I just knit it in the colors that are like basically shown in the pictures? Because I do really love how this looks. To me, it just feels a little more neutral than like I would want to do in a colorwork sweater. Like, I think this would be really beautiful in like a textured pattern. And I did actually consider using this kind of yarn for the Ballard pullover. The problem was that that requires a worsted weight, and just getting the amount of yardage I would need in a worsted weight of this yarn was going to be significantly more expensive. So I decided to go with the DK. But so I feel like if I'm doing stranded color work, I kind of want it to have some color. I'm just really struggling to figure out what that is. So we'll see if I figure that out. The other thing that I would like to adjust in this pattern, I think if I did it, is the little like flex on the bottom half. I really love the way that these like pull the effect of the yoke down further in the garment. There's something about a yoke design that like ends really abruptly, like where it joins for the underarm, that just kind of like sits weird in my brain. Like, I just don't love it. So I do really like that this design has a component that kind of fades that out a little more organically. But I think that if I were to do it, I would make that, like, are they called fleas? I feel like I've heard this before, but I find this to be a very like gross way to describe it. Anyway, I would make it a little more regular, like they're deliberately randomized here, and I think I would just prefer a version in a more regular sort of way. All right, the next option of what I might do with this yarn is the Mariana by Heidi Rezes. So this one has these beautiful flowers all around the yoke. I think it's so fun, and I love how it's sort of sitting at the intersection of a very bold graphic motif while also using these very organic nature themes. Like, I think that's kind of one of my favorite combinations in, I guess, like art and design generally. Like, I think that if I were to review my collection of like art that is up in my house, probably 80% or more of it is like depictions of nature, but that are very sort of like graphic or bold or minimal or whatever. So this is just a category of design that I really, really love. So this pattern costs $8 US or about $12 Canadian. It's also top-down circular yoke, knit up on 4.5mm needles, so a little bit bigger than I've been working on lately, which would be nice. And its finished garment dimensions go up to 65 inches, but its intended ease is not specified, so that's entirely up to you. But I feel like 5 inches of positive ease is kind of a common number, so if we go with that, that does allow it to fit up to a 60-inch bust. And this is one where, again, of course I would have to figure out what color I'm pairing it with, but I'm kind of thinking on this one. I think that if I go with this one, I will use black as my contrast color. I think that a low contrast version of this design would be really, really beautiful and kind of bridge what, for me, I feel like there's always sort of a tension in colorwork sweaters where the motif is a flower between like the winterness of this, you know, thick stranded colorwork wool sweater and the inherent not winterness of the flower. And I feel like something about really like muting the flowers in this low contrast format sort of makes the flowers feel more like wintry to wear, if that makes sense. I don't care. It just feels right. I also think that part of my instinct to do that is because the flowers are so bold that the effect from the distance of, like I was talking about before, the yoke that like abruptly cuts off, like that would be very heightened by how big and chunky this motif is. So I think that it's also in that way that using a really low contrast version of this appeals to me. Another option, because like I said, we've got a few, is the Cotton Grass by the Petite Knitter, not to be confused with Petite Knit. I did not realize that there's also a pattern designer called the Petite Knitter. Here we are. So this is again, a top-down circular yoke. It knits up on 4mm needles. This pattern costs $13 Canadian, and I believe it looks like there's actually like 2 different sets of sizing, like there's a men's sizing and a women's sizing. And the women's sizing accommodates up to a 61-inch bust, and the men's sizing accommodates up to a 63-inch. Now this pattern also comes with 2 different options of how to do the yoke. So there's this version, which is sort of a standard, here's your top-down circular yoke sweater, and here's what the contrast color looks like on the yoke. But then there's this version where it's sort of flipped and the neckline is actually in your contrast color, and this is the version that I love. I feel like something about the neck being in the contrast color mitigates a lot of what bugs me about yoke designs that abruptly stop. Like it's like it makes it feel more integrated or like intentional in a way, I guess. So I really like this option, and I'm thinking that if I did this option, I would probably just use like a creamy off-white for that color against the warm brown of the rest of it. I just feel like in this particular case with the contrast neck, I feel like that would be so pretty. All right, option number 4, we have the Forest Land by Jennifer Stein Guest. So yet again, top-down circular yoke. I'm just, you know what, spoiler, all of the options for this yarn are top-down circular yokes. It knits up on a 4mm needle, and it's designed to fit between a 61.5 and a 65.5 inch bust, just depending on how much of the recommended positive ease that you want. And this pattern costs $8 US or about $12 Canadian. So this one I have mixed feelings about. I think it's one of my less likely contenders. But here's my problem. I really love the motif on it. I think that it's so beautiful. I'm a little bit uncertain about the wider neckband. I just don't think that's the look that I want for this sweater that I'm imagining. But it's staying here in part because, I mean, A, like I guess that is probably a thing I could figure out how to modify. But B, I knit tight. So there's a very high chance that my neck is gonna end up tighter than it's supposed to anyway. So even if I just knit this as written, I would probably end up with something a lot closer to a regular crew neck sweater. So that's probably not an issue. And I do really love this motif. I feel like it's sort of light enough and unchunky enough that it doesn't really have the same effect in my brain where I'm like, why does the motif suddenly stop, you know? So this one, despite my neckline uncertainties, is definitely still a contender. The next contender though is the Obsidian by Tanya Barley. So this one knits up on 375mm needles, so a little bit smaller, and it costs €8 or about $12.50 Canadian. And this one has a really broad range of how much positive ease it recommends. I think the high end is like 14 inches, but then it also goes much lower. So depending on how much of that you want, this pattern accommodates up to between a 55 and a 63-inch bust, which is a really broad range. So this one really just comes down to how much ease you want. So something I like about this pattern, which you may have already figured out based on what I have been saying, is I love that this motif comes down so far. I love that it keeps going below the arms. Of course, that also means it's going to be so much more work on the colorwork front because you don't just get to knit most of the body in plain stockinette, but it also has these really dramatic sleeves. And it also has options to knit the body straight or actually in an A-line to give it that really big sort of oversized billowy shape, which I do love. I'm skeptical whether I have enough yarn for this. The pattern yarn suggestions implies that I do. I am just a little uncertain, and I'm like, on the one hand, okay, well maybe it's because there's so much of the contrast color that it conserves you some main color yarn, but on the other hand, like, it's stranded color work. It's not like you're not using, like there's 2 strands. And I suppose the color that's not making its way into the stitch and is just being pulled across is using less yarn because it's not going into a whole stitch shape, it's just going straight. But is that true to such an extent that this much of the contrast color really saves you a very considerable amount of your main color? I don't really know. I don't have the experience with stranded color work to feel like I have some sort of instinctual answer to that. I just look at how big this sweater is and how much yarn I have and go, I'm not sure. And I just don't really want to be playing yarn chicken with yarn that I don't know how easy it would be for me to acquire more of. And even if I did, if it's from a different batch, it seems very likely to me, as you know, this is like an undyed natural yarn, that it might be slightly different. And I don't know, it just seems like a gamble, but it sure is pretty. So if this is a thing you know a lot about, like if you would be like, oh yeah, 100%, like that amount of contrast color is going to dramatically reduce your use of main color, please do let me know because I'm curious. I'm a little bit scared of this one for that reason, because I don't feel like this is one where, oh, it can just be a cropped sweater. Like I don't feel like this style works with that idea very well. So please let me know if you have any guidance on this. Okay, the sixth and final option for this yarn, because we're finally getting to the end of possibilities, but do you see how much my brain has been like spinning on like, what do I do with this yarn? Our final option is the El Naranjo from Claudia Quintanilla, which you may remember from the maybe probably not section of my fall knitting plans. So there's kind of a few like asterisks on this one, because I do feel like this would be a really beautiful use of this yarn. I again love how sort of light the motif is. This makes me feel better about it kind of abruptly stopping, and it actually is so sort of briefly used in the yoke, like it doesn't even come down, I think, all the way to the underarms, if I'm remembering this right. You're looking at a picture, you might know that I'm making no sense right now, but it just feels, because it's so light and so small, that it doesn't feel like it stops abruptly. It feels like a sort of gradual fade. But problem number one, this is a pattern that's only available in Claudia Quintanilla's new book, which is I think like $55. So that's like a lot to lay out just for one pattern, and I'm not sure if there are other patterns in that book that I want to knit. I would need to do further investigating, but I also just like, I don't love to buy patterns before I'm like actively planning to knit them. So to buy $55 worth of patterns, like I just feel like it kind of traps me into like having to knit more of them in a way that I don't love, but it is a really beautiful design. The other factor that's a bit about this is that this is a fingering weight pattern. But I'm thinking, okay, well, honestly, like I would be very happy, like if I just knit this basically in the smallest size in my DK weight yarn, it'll just come out a bit oversized, which honestly, I think I would really love. The question though, there is about yardage. Do I have enough yardage? And it's a bit hard to know, because obviously the pattern's giving yardage for fingering weight. I do not have the amount of fingering weight yardage given, but I also know that I will be knitting fewer rows of this to get to the needed length. So it's like, do I have enough? Do I not have enough? I don't really know. Though I do feel like this is one that actually could turn out cropped and would be fine. So I'm like, these are all possibilities. Do you see my problem? Anyway, so this is a pattern that fits up to between a 59.5 to a 64.5 inch bust, just depending on how much of the recommended positive ease that you want. And if you're actually knitting it at the fingering weight, unlike what I would be doing, it is knit on 3.5mm needles. And actually, I kind of lied before I realized now when I said that these are all top-down circular yoke constructions, because this one, it is top-down in the round. The Ravelry page suggests that it includes short rows, and I'm not sure if there are maybe other like construction differences there as well. So that's it. That's the end of the possibilities for my Vancouver yarn. So as you can see, many decisions still need to be made, but the good news is that I have some time because I am still very much in the depths of the Minu cardigan. So let me know if you have thoughts, if you have suggestions, if you can think of a way to combine this with a fun color that you think would actually look nice. Do you have any guidance, suggestions, recommendations? Let me know. But all of that, everything we just talked about, that's just one project. I mean two, if we count the collet that we also talked about quickly. And now realistically, between those two sweaters, the collet and whichever one of these six that I decide to do, realistically, that's my winter knitting. I don't really imagine that I could possibly squeeze in another project. But in the interest of collecting fun winter knitting patterns, in the interest of acknowledging that sometimes we decide we don't currently feel like knitting the thing we thought we were gonna feel like knitting, here are a couple of honorable mentions. So the first one is the Nelly sweater from Gregoria Fibers. So this one is an all mohair sweater. You're holding, the pattern says 3 strands of lace weight yarn together. Now, I am thinking of this as a way to use up my many extra balls of the Touch Me Mohair from We Are Knitters in the color mustard from my No Frills cardigan, because those balls are ginormous. They were very on sale when I got them, and I was very afraid of running out of yarn for my cardigan, particularly because it looked at the time like they might be discontinuing that colorway. So I really erred on the side of caution, and now I have a lot of this. Now I do not have enough of it to knit this sweater using 3 strands held together, but I do believe that I should have enough holding 2 strands together. And I in fact did make a little tiny swatch for this one a while ago using 2 strands, and I do like how it looks. Like it definitely will have a bit of a sheer effect. I would wear something underneath, but it did feel like this really nice, airy, fuzzy, wonderful fabric that I was like, okay, I think this can work with 2 strands of the Touch Me Mohair. So this is one that actually I think I will knit at some point. I believe maybe I'll come up with something else I want to do with that yarn instead, but I do want to use that yarn at some point, and this is the best idea I've yet come up with for doing that. So this pattern accommodates up to a 62 inch bust, and it's knit up on 5mm needles, which I think, like if I at some point decide I need a project that's like a break from the other things that I'm knitting, knitting something up on 5mm needles after doing so much at 4 is just gonna feel really nice, I think, especially because it's not cables, it's not stranded color work, it's just this really wide rib. It'll also be a nice project because to me, it will basically be free because I have already sort of budgeted all the cost of this yarn toward the No Frills cardigan. So I would only be paying the cost of the pattern, which is $7.12 in euros or about $11 Canadian, $8 US. And it's also a raglan style construction, which would be a nice sort of shift from what I've been doing. I just feel like this one will be a really nice process knit, and I also think I will really love how it ends up. I just don't feel the same urgency with this one. I think just because it's using, you know, sort of yarn that's been in my stash for a bit. I think of it more as a stash busting project, whereas I'm more excited to use this yarn or this yarn, you know, yarn that I have purchased very specifically for a particular project that I'm excited to cast on, whereas this one is more just like, it'll be nice if that's a free project, you know? So I was like maybe a month and a half ago actually considering casting this one on. That's why I actually did the little swatch, just as a break from the cables that I was doing on my Christmas stocking, and also, you know, thinking about knitting the new cardigan next. Like I was just feeling like it would kind of be nice to have something on the needles that's not so elaborate, that doesn't require cabling. But I ultimately just decided like, these stockings are taking longer than I thought. I do not have time for that if I just want to have any chance at having this new cardigan finished for Christmas, which like, again, we'll see. And then for the little bit of kind of break knitting that I did do, I ended up doing that on Dad's socks for Fix It Fall, because those were much more sort of straightforward knitting. So that kind of filled that gap for a while. And now that I'm on the new cardigan, I'm like, I just want to stick with this and get as close to done for Christmas as I possibly can. So this one has not yet made it to the front of the queue, but it is very much a future plan that I think is going to stick around. It might just keep getting bumped from season to season until I eventually get around to it. We'll see. All right, so the last thing in the sort of honorable mention category, I think there's almost no way I'm getting to this winter, but it's nice to dream, you know? This is the Instant Crush sweater by Joji Locatelli. Now, this one is funny to me because I had actually seen this design before and didn't give it a second thought. And then I saw Amy's version, Amy from La Bien-Aimée, and it was like a choir of angels sang. Like her eye for color is just so fantastic. This is why so many of the La Bien-Aimée yarns are so beautiful. I love this so much. And it makes me want to do something sort of similarly bright and pastel and fun with this pattern. So this is a top-down, I believe, raglan style construction, knit up on 4mm needles, and it accommodates up to a 66-inch bust, and the pattern costs $8 US. So I just think it's so interesting how different colorways of the same pattern can have such a big impact on how you perceive that pattern. It really makes me realize how much pressure there is on pattern designers to knit sort of the best possible sample that's in a colorway that's going to appeal to the most possible people, because I mean, even if, you know, I know a lot of pattern designers will include pictures from, you know, various test knitters in the project photos. And so you get a broad sense of the possibilities that way. But even still, on Ravelry, like there's still just one cover photo that people see. People really have to be interested enough to look further from that one picture that you choose. And it's just wild to me how much of an impact it makes. I think this is also why so many people will just knit the exact colorway that is shown in the sample photos, right? I think that when you tend to look through the projects of a pattern, like at least 50% of them look virtually identical to the sample, right? Because so often how it looks in the exact color that we're shown it is a big part of what we like about the pattern. So it's just, I don't know, like as someone who has thought about the idea of pattern design, and you know, I am intimidated by the like garment construction part of it. I love the idea of doing like color work charts. The thought that the colors that I show that in could have such a big impact on how that pattern does is like, God, like that's daunting. So I don't know, I just think this is a really interesting like case study of that, because I saw this and I was like, meh, that's nice, it's not for me. And then I saw this and I was like, whoa, I need that. So it's just wild. All right, this now brings us to a WIP update, because my last winter knitting plan is just finishing the Minu cardigan that I started as part of my fall knitting plans. That is, like I said, ostensibly for my sister for Christmas. Is it actually? TBD. I mean, well, here's the situation. It will be her Christmas gift, regardless of whether it's finished, because if it is Christmas Eve and it is not finished, I will be wrapping and putting under the tree a half-finished sweater. A, because I think it's funny. I think she'll think it's funny. And B, because it's her Christmas present and she just might get the finished thing a little bit later, but she will open it. I will take it back and continue working on it while we're hanging out for Christmas, which is even funnier. And then eventually, maybe January, February, I will hand it back to her, actually finished. Now, I am still hoping to have it done for actual Christmas. I have not yet relinquished that possibility entirely. I'm just looking at my progress and going, that doesn't look like it's halfway done. So for reference, I started this October 25th. I'm now recording this on November 30th, so it's now been more than half of my time. I had exactly 2 months, and I've now used more than a month, and it doesn't look half done. In fact, I know it's not half done because I've not yet completed half of my balls of yarn. So there is that. However, I also had a couple weeks in the last month that I've been working on this where I did extremely little knitting because I was so busy with other things. So I'm hoping that sort of factoring that in and doing a lot of knitting over the next month, that it's actually possible. We're not sure. We're gonna cross our fingers and see what happens. But I haven't actually given you the project stats yet. So this is the Minu cardigan by Louise Rekhoff. This pattern costs €6.50 or about $10 Canadian, and it accommodates up to between a 58 and a 62 inch bust, just depending on how much of the recommended positive ease that you want. And for my sister, I'm knitting the size 3. I'm knitting this out of the Cascade 220 Superwash in the color Deep Sea Coral. Superwash so that my sister doesn't shrink this on me. And I bought 10 balls of this to use. So I ordered this from Leyland Biscuit, which is a Canadian yarn store. And I think the only place where I could find 10 whole balls of this in this color at the time. So the yarn cost me $152 Canadian. I think I got free shipping because I ordered so much of it. So between the pattern and the yarn, this cost me about $163 Canadian, which works out to about 119 US. So this is written to be knit up on 4mm needles, and I think it's a drop shoulder construction. You start with the back and then you pick up for the front panels, join at the underarm, and then you knit the sleeves in the round. There are a lot of cables in this design, so this is not a time-consuming design, much like the Christmas stockings. It's definitely less chaotic than the Christmas stockings. There are only 2 different kinds of cables that you do, and they're a little more spread out than they were in the Christmas stocking, so it's not as bad, but it is very intensive still. And obviously it's much bigger than the Christmas stockings, so it is taking significantly more time. Oh God, I have to try to untangle all the yarn. Okay, so the last time we talked about this, I had just done part of the back. So I think this is the cast on edge. I think I was maybe to like here. I just kind of had a few inches of the back. So where we are now is that I completed the back panel up to the point where you pause that and pick up to knit the front panel. So this is hard to show you what's going on because there's not really enough of it, but pause to knit this front panel. You can see this diagonal edge is the V-neck shaping happening. And then over here is part of a sleeve. So what I did was I knit the back, I pick up to knit the front, you then join at the underarm, and then I just knit a little bit of the body all in one piece, like the back and the front's connected, until I ran out of that was my second ball of yarn to get to that point. So once I ran out of that second ball of yarn, I decided to cast on the sleeves. And I actually am currently knitting the sleeves 2 at a time, so they're at exactly the same length. You can't really tell that I'm knitting them 2 at a time right now because I've separated them, but that is just so that I can actually try this on because I've not yet been able to try this on since I started the sleeves. But I have been knitting them 2 at a time, like on one circular, and I am really liking that because like when I'm working with Magic Loop, I don't love the part where you have to flip it around. So just to like cut in half the number of times I have to flip it around is really nice. But if you were paying attention and you heard that I, was just at the end of my second ball of yarn when I finished the body up to the point it is now, I've cast on these sleeves each with their own fresh ball of yarn, which now both, are basically identically the same size. They both still look like this. So these are my 3rd and 4th balls of yarn for the respective sleeves, which means that we're probably done like maybe 3.25 balls of yarn, which is notably not 5 balls of yarn, which is where we should be if we were on schedule. So that's how we know we're not, and we will see what happens. You may also notice, if you saw my last update on this, that this is much less jingly than it was last time because when I was working that back panel, I had approximately 1 million stitch markers on my needles because I was using them to delineate the different cables and the 2 different, it's all the same cable motif, but half of them are shifted by 50%, so they're in sort of like a bricklay style. So just to keep track of them, I had all these markers breaking out each piece. And I found that really helpful when I was just starting with the pattern and getting accustomed to it, and there wasn't really enough worked up to read my knitting very easily. And so then once it came time to actually join the backs and the front all together, I was like, hey, do I want to go through all the trouble of getting these all set up? And also, do I even have enough stitch markers to be doing the back and the front all in one row with all these stitch markers in here? I literally don't think I even have enough to do that. So maybe I should just try doing it without. Maybe I'm accustomed enough to this. And at this point, there is a lot of material here for me to look at, to read my knitting and understand where I am. And I did find that that was totally the case. Having had that experience up to that point, I was ready to go without stitch markers, which is kind of nice, right? To not have all those jingling everywhere, because it was a lot of stitch markers. There are a lot of repeats in one round of this. So I'm happy to have graduated to this phase, but I do think that those were very helpful for me when I was first getting started. Other thing that's been very helpful for me is my cheat sheet, which I will mostly cover because paid pattern, but I live and die by this thing. My little like fake laminated with packing tape cheat sheet that's just the pattern, just using my little binder clip to indicate where I am in it. Lifesaver, not having to pull up the pattern all the time. It's been a lifesaver. Highly recommend if you are doing something working off a chart, highly recommend just printing off and fake laminating your own little cheat sheet of the chart. Also, not the sleeves, but all of the body up to this point has actually been blocked. I decided to do a mid-project block just to get a sense of how much was this gonna grow. And I realized I did not, I think, note down for this video what the growth was. I have like pictures of measuring tape laid on this in my phone, which I'm recording on, so I can't look at it right now. But I do remember being kind of surprised that it did not grow more than it did. It didn't grow very much, but also I think that superwash tends to grow the most vertically, and there just isn't a lot of verticality here yet. So I think that when I'm maybe sort of 3/4 of the way through the sleeves, I will do another block to make sure, because I think sleeves are a place where superwash can get really out of control. But I also really wanted to test out blocking this with the dryer before I got too far. Very important to me to make sure that that was going to be a-okay, and I knew that with this yarn it should be. However, I've also had the experience. I once had one ball of my sweater's quantity of superwash wool. One ball was not superwash, and it just, the one ball felted like in the middle of the sweater, and it was terrible. And I just wanted to know if that was going to happen. I wanted that to happen on my time so that this didn't happen and my sister go, oh my god, did I do this? Did I do something wrong? So I wanted to make sure all was good. It could go in the dryer, it could be fine. Edit, in fact, was. I put it in on high heat and it was fine. This doesn't mean that because it spent a bit of time in the dryer, there is a bit of pilling happening, like not egregiously, but it does just not look as brand new as the sleeves currently do. Obviously the sleeves will look more like that once they've also been through the dryer, but I might need to do a little bit of shaving on this before I give it to my sister, just so that it doesn't kind of look like I wore it a bunch before I gave it to her. I also think that sometimes I have a bit of a concern of like, is the sleeve like a darker color now? But like if some of the color did wash out when I blocked this part, that will also happen here, and so in theory it would match. But there's also something weird about this yarn where I think just like maybe it's the slightly shininess of a superwash yarn that in different lighting it can look so different. Like sometimes I feel like this looks so light and this looks darker, but then I'll kind of hold this differently in different light and it looks lighter. I don't know. I think on camera, I think there is maybe a slight difference, but so again, I have to assume the same is going to happen when this gets wet. It'll probably lose some of its color also. I don't know, hopefully it's fine. So I have been mostly enjoying working on this. I mean, I never love it when it's time for a cable row, but I do love how the cables are coming together. Like it's just so pretty. Like it's just a beautiful stitch pattern, even if it is a very time consuming one. And I'm just feeling very aware of the fact that like, okay, once I have the sleeves done and working on the body, maybe it'll feel like it's coming together a little bit quicker, but then I still have to do a double knit button band at the end, which I have never done before. But I know I have done double knitting before, so I know that you're basically knitting every row twice, and that's not going to be not time consuming. And I'm going to feel like I'm basically done and I will still have so much to do. Now, one saving grace of this is that I'm not planning to put buttons on it, so that's one less stage I have to do. I think my sister is just more of a not button open cardigan person, so that will help me out a little, but there's just so much to do on this and not so much time. But let's actually try this on and see where we're at. All right, I have to carry my project bag with me because I'm all still attached, but oh no, why are you coming off the tubing? No. So this is where we're currently at. The neck of this is currently feeling obviously very open, but that is in large part because it is obviously missing a button band. It's gonna bring it in probably about that much. So based on that, I feel like we're in pretty good shape. I feel like the arm is kind of a good size, and I think the cables will loosen up a bit in blocking also. So fun to see that we're like roughly elbow length, though actually I think I got my brother-in-law to measure one of my sister's sweaters for like the chest width. But I realized I think I also need to get him to do like a wingspan on a sweater she likes, because she's shorter than me, which means that her arms are shorter than mine. So I am not going to be a good gauge of how long these sleeves should be. So I do think I need to ask for that measurement. But yeah, I think like the drop shoulder is kind of deceptive, right? Like when I'm knitting the sleeve, I'm like, oh, I've only knit this much. But because the shoulder comes down, you do actually have more sleeve than it looks like you do. So that's kind of nice. What's not nice is that like, look how much body is still missing. Look how much body I have to knit. It's like a shrug. So because I am stopping to knit the sleeves now, which is in part because you know, the sleeves can kind of only be one length, but the body length can vary a little depending on what is possible with the amount of yarn I have left. I wanted to get the sleeves done first, also prevent sleeve island. But because of that, I think that what's going to happen for Christmas is that my sister is definitely going to have finished sleeves. And it's just a question of exactly how cropped the body is when she receives it, if it is not a finished length. So that's kind of a fun game. Place your bets now. It also looks funny like closer up here. You could just, I just feel like it just looks so wide. But again, it's because we're missing that button band. But yeah, here we go. Here's the new cardigan as it currently stands in alarming condition, given how close we are to Christmas now. And that's it for my winter knitting plan. So I would really love to know, what are you most excited to knit this winter? Please let me know in the comments. And now it's time to get into Off the Needles, which is a segment where I talk about non-knitting related things, just sort of different creative hobby-ish stuff. All right, so first I do have a book update. And I just want to mention, because I never do, that anytime I mention a book, I actually link to it in the description from bookshop.org, which if you don't know, if you're in the US, you can actually order books through bookshop.org like as easily as you can order them through Amazon, except that a cut of your purchase actually goes toward a local bookstore of your choice, which is so nice, and you get to support them even if it's not realistic for you to actually go to that store at any given time to get the book yourself. And also, since in my last video, my gift guide, I was thinking about how much sense audiobooks make for knitters, I'm actually going to start linking the audiobooks for these books on Libro.fm as well, because Libro.fm is basically the audiobook version of bookshop.org, where part of your purchase goes through the local bookstore of your choice, and it supports them, again, instead of Amazon. So I just think those are really nice options, and if you're interested, those links are always in the description. All right, so finished objects and books. I finally have The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. So if you've been here a while, you know I've been trying to read this for a while. And I was trying to read this book when I was really having a reading slump and having a hard time kind of getting into anything. And that dragged on for quite a while. And I eventually pivoted to some different books to read, kind of get some more reading momentum behind me. And then I eventually came back to The Pairing. And this one I'm sort of torn on, because I have loved every single one of Casey McQuiston's other books that I've read. I just really, really love their writing style. And I feel like my experience with this book was sort of, if you too have in the last couple of weeks seen the same movie that I've seen in the last couple of weeks, I think you could describe my experience with this book as dancing through life. Like, just sort of not really engaging with it in any sort of very meaningful way. Like, I just kind of felt very surface level in my engagement with this book. Like, not that the book is surface level, but just that I felt like I could never get like all the way into it for some reason. So while I did enjoy Casey's writing like I always do, I just never really got fully pulled in like I normally do, though the ending did make me really happy. I did get really into it like at the very end, but like that's a long way to go for getting really in, right? And like, if Casey were not an author who I have so much trust in from so many past beloved reads, I don't think that I would have gotten that far. But I find it really hard to tell if this was just like a my mood reading this book, or if something is actually different about Casey's writing in this book from their other ones. Because like, is it just that I read the first half of this book while in a big reading slump, and so I didn't really get that into it, and even when I got back into reading, I was still lacking like the groundwork of having been immersed in the story by the first half, you know? Like, if I had not read any of it and read the first half once I was enjoying reading more again, would I have liked it more? I don't know. So very sort of torn on this one. Like, if you love Casey's writing, definitely pick this one up if the premise is compelling to you. So this is basically a romance where two exes end up accidentally on like a European food tour together. Like, I definitely recommend picking it up. I highly suspect this was just a problem of like my mood while reading. It just didn't do for me what Casey McQuiston books usually do. So that was a little bit disappointing, but I did actually finish it after all this time. So now I have a new reading whip. I am reading Verona in Autumn by Tom Lloyd. And this is another one that I'm like, is this gonna be an ill-fated read? Because I actually picked this up and started reading it last summer, like not a few months ago, like a year plus a few months ago. And I got about 50 pages into it at the cottage. And then I don't remember exactly what happened, but for some reason I kind of ended up putting this down for something else that felt more like urgent that I like really wanted to read. And then I just kind of didn't circle back to it in any prompt timing. I think I kind of hit a reading slump then, and it's just sort of sat on my shelf for a while. And I picked it up again going, do I pick up from where I left off 50 pages in? Do I start over? And I decided to start over, but now I'm wondering if that was the wrong choice, because I've not yet even like caught up to where I had left off, and I'm already feeling meh about it when I remember liking it more than that the first time. So I'm like, should I just not be rereading this? I don't know. But anyway, the premise of this book, this falls into the category of Shakespeare adjacent retellings, reinterpretations, reimaginings, whatever, that I very much like to read. So this one is about Romeo and Juliet. if Verona sounds familiar to you. But in a universe where they actually did not die, like where the plan actually worked and they actually do escape together to go start their lives anew. And in this book, it is many years later, they have like teenage children and they have decided to return to Verona, kind of confront their past and their families and see the aftermath of everything that happened after they left. So I love this premise. This book was also, I believe, recommended by Lena Norms, whose channel I absolutely love. I've been watching her for years, and I think that that's where I got this recommendation from. But I'm now realizing I love Lena so much. I think we might have very different reading tastes, because if I don't successfully get into this book eventually, I think that will make this the third book that I have bought on her recommendation that I have not gotten into and eventually given up on. So it might just be that we have very different reading tastes, which is very possible. Some of my very best friends, I can't take their book recommendations because we have different tastes in books. Shout out Amy, hi. So I don't know, part of me is like, should I just skip to page 50 where I was and pick up from there, because it's really dragging for me trying to reread this part? But I don't know. I would really love to not end up in another reading slump. So maybe that's what I should do. Maybe I should just pick up a different fresh book. I don't know. We'll update next time. So my last update for this segment is going to be in the category of writing. So I had talked last time about how I'm like, okay, I really need to figure out what is my plot basically for a new book, because I really need to start working on a new one. So I decided I was going to dedicate myself in November to like actively working on that on the regular. And so I can say that I've been working on that. That is going. Is it going somewhere? Is it going to an actual plot outline that I actually want to write? That is to be determined. I feel like I have made some real progress. I've come up with some ideas that I like, but I also am still kind of struggling trying to make sure that I'm landing on a version of it that feels like it has a really like solid and clear hook to the story that will make it actually like pitchable. This is like the great struggle of my writing life. And I feel like I am getting closer. I just know that I do not feel like I am there yet. I was hoping I would be there by the end of November, and yet here we are, November 30th, and I am not done that. We have made progress, we have not arrived. So hopefully we're arriving somewhere. I'm gonna keep working on it. It is what it is. Writing is hard. All right, so with that, that's all I've got for you today. So thank you so much for coming to knit with me. If you'd like to be here next time, please do consider subscribing if you're not already, but if you are, you're my favorite, and I'll see you next time. Bye.